teach them about life, about themselves, about their connection with the environment and ecology, and basically how they can become better human beings. And so the type of education that I have been involved in is what I would call Gandhian education, because that's what my grandfather taught all of us. And so I teach this through nonviolence, the philosophy of nonviolence. And the philosophy of nonviolence is very comprehensive philosophy. It's not just not fighting or not hitting anybody, but it is about yourself, discovering yourself and bringing out all the goodness that exists in every human being, and becoming good human beings there. So this is what I teach, and a lot of children have, and young people have found it very useful.
And do you believe that we have first to change ourselves and just after that start changing the world?
Yes, unless we change, we can't make other people change. And so, my grandfather used to say, we have to live what we want others to learn. If we don't live it, they are not going to learn it.
And it applies to everybody,
It
politicians.
applies to everybody. Nobody is exempt from that. And my grandfather always, before he told anybody else to do anything, he did it himself. And then he asked others to do it. And when people saw him doing it, they felt compelled to do it themselves. There's a very interesting story about this. There was, he had set up a community, ashram community in India, where he invited people to come and live in a non-violent lifestyle. And there was a young couple there who had a boy about 7, 8 years old at the time. And this boy used to love sweets. He used to eat a lot of sweets, chocolates and candies and sugar, just a lot of sweets. And it started affecting his health. So they took him to the doctor, and the doctor said, you have to control his sweets. Don't let him eat so much. So the parents would come home every day and they would bully him and nag him and say, you are not going to eat sweets. The doctor said no. And yet they would have sweets on the table and everybody else was eating. So this boy didn't obey his parents. When nobody was looking, he would grab some and eat. So he couldn't be cured. Then after a few weeks of this frustration, the parents brought the boy to my grandfather and pleaded with grandfather to speak to him and tell him why he should not eat sweets. The grandfather said, you come back after 2 weeks and I will speak with him. Now, they didn't know why they had to wait for 2 weeks, why couldn't he speak to him now? But they didn't have the courage to ask him, so they went away and came back after 2 weeks. And grandfather took this boy aside and just spoke with him for less than a minute. And the boy went home and gave up sweets, didn't eat sweets anymore. So the parents were shocked and they said, what kind of a miracle did you perform? That we were trying to tell him the same thing and he wouldn't listen to us, and yet you were able to speak to him for less than a minute. And he's given up. So he said it wasn't a miracle. He said, the reason I asked you to come back after 2 weeks was I had to give up eating sweets before I could ask him. So all I did was just tell him that I have stopped eating sweets and I will not eat sweets until you are allowed to eat sweets, so will you give it up? So the lesson in this is that if we don't practice what we want others to learn, they won't learn. So the change has to come from us, each one of us. If we bring peace in ourselves, if we live in peace, then others will learn to live in peace.
And how could we convince the society as a whole to?
And about the punishment, that is on the base of the non-violence education too.
And I'd like to understand how to convince the society as a whole to adopt these measures and this act.
Well, it just happens, when people start changing and living in peace. You start a community here, and that community grows, and others see you, and they want to practice the same thing. And so it just keeps growing, and then eventually the whole society changes. So it has to begin with the self, and demonstrate it. There's again another wonderful story of a young man who was a very haphazard kind of person. He never cleaned his home and never washed dishes. He was living alone. So everything was in a mess in his house. And then one day he met a lady, and she gave him a rose, and there was a relationship budding there. And she gave him a rose. He brought the rose home, and he couldn't find a clean vase to put the rose in. So he hunted through all the dirty dishes, and he found the vase, and he washed it and put the rose there. Then he couldn't find a place clean enough to place that vase. So he cleaned up the table and put the vase there. And then when he saw that the table was clean and everything else around it was very dirty, he said, "This is not good, he's got to clean the whole room." So he started, and eventually he cleaned up the whole house, just because of one rose. In the same way, if one person becomes peaceful in a community, the family is affected, and the family then affects the neighbors, and the neighbors affect the community. It grows.
And do you believe that it's easier to start this process through children because they are more pure?
Yeah, they are pure, their mind is not corrupted like our adults are, and they are going to inherit the world, they are going to be the leaders. So logically, if we give them the right kind of message, then hopefully they will learn to change. But this whole thing, like she was just reminding me about punishment. How we perpetuate the culture of violence in society is how we bring up our children. We as parents planted the first seeds of violence in our children when we punish them for something that they do wrong. And that gives them the idea that anybody who does anything wrong needs to be punished. And so the whole process begins, and that's how violence is perpetuated.
They tend to repeat what they receive.
Yeah. So in non-violence, punishment is not important. Penance is important. When I was growing up, my parents believed in non-violence. So my two sisters and I, we were not punished when we did something wrong. Our parents did penance. Depending on how serious the offense was, they would fast for a day or 2 days or whatever it is. They would feed us, they would cook the meal, they would feed us, they would sit at the dining table and talk with us and tell us why they were not eating. Because they were not good parents, they didn't teach us the right way of behavior. So they had to do penance for it. And that way they showed us the love and the non-violence and taught us the importance of being good.
But wouldn't this bring a lot of guilt to your parents, assuming you're in
It would bring guilt to everybody, but if you do something wrong, you have to feel guilty about it. If you don't feel guilty, you will never change. And so guilt is good if you learn from it and become better and stop doing the wrong things. But if you continue to do the wrong thing and you don't care about what the effect is, then that doesn't help anybody.
And can you tell me a little bit more about the children who go to the institute? Where do they come from and what usually happens to them after they finish their education?
Well, we found, there are more than 78 million people who are homeless in India, and many of them have children. One thing we found that the poor the family is, the more children they have. And that is because for us, there are so many mouths to feed, but for them, they look at so many hands to work. And they need everybody who can work and bring in some income. So they have more children. And so the children are the ones who suffer most in the poverty. They never are able to get out of that cycle of poverty, and they live in that for generations. So we thought we would do something to give them a helping hand, to make them get out of that cycle and improve their lives. So we have started this school where we rescue children from poverty and bring them there and give them holistic education and vocational training, and hopefully set them up in life so that they can earn some money and change the lives of the whole family.
Do you believe that contraceptive methods and a better role of the government when it comes to family planning would help to break the cycle, or the fact that they need more hands to work is stronger?
I think the more hands to work is stronger, because India is the first country among the developing countries who started family planning way back in the early 1950s. And yet they were not able to achieve the goal, and that is because they have not eradicated poverty. You can't go and teach people something and yet leave them ignorant and poor. Simple thing, how is a poor family who don't know where the next meal is going to come from going to go and buy condoms? Or get them? So, all those things need to be understood, and unless we eradicate poverty itself, we won't be able to control population.
I read that you said that poverty is one of the worst kinds of violence. Can you explain me a little bit more and tell me how this can be worse than other kinds of violences, such as social discrimination?
Well, other kinds of violences are immediate and short-term. We have a war, and that war ends in a few years and everything is back to normal. But poverty is something people have to live in day and night, and they have to suffer it all the time. And unfortunately, we as civilized human beings, we ignore poverty. We think it's not our business. If people are living in our neighborhood who are poor, and they are stupid, they can't manage themselves, so nothing we can do. And so we have that attitude towards poverty, and we don't do anything to help anybody, because we have all become very selfish and self-centered in a materialistic society. We are taught to think about ourselves alone and not be concerned about others. When our children start going to school, we continuously tell them, you've got to be successful in life, and success means getting to the top. And don't think about anybody else, you just think about yourself and get to the top. We are planting seeds of selfishness. We're making the child realize that they just have to think about themselves and nobody else.
Do you believe that the education based in evaluations and tests and scores perpetuates this?
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, our whole education is based on materialism. It's all about what can you do to go and earn $1 million. Today in the United States, in the universities, young people come there and they ask the admissions director, show us a course that we can take and go out and earn $1 million. It doesn't matter whether you're interested in it or not, or whether it's effective or not. The objective is to make $1 million by any means possible. And so, and our whole measurement of success as a society is what do you possess? What kind of car do you have, and what kind of possessions you have? How much money you have in the bank. That is the measure of success. Nothing else matters. So when we create a society like that, when everything is about materialism and possession, then there's going to be conflict all the time between those who have and those who don't have.
Can you tell me a little bit more about your childhood? Was you raised with these principles, or was your education a different kind of education?
Mine was very different kind because I never went to school. I was taught at home.
By your parents?
By my
or did you have
parents, my
teachers?
grandparents. Sometimes they brought in teachers, some family member or somebody from outside. But we had our education at home, and I'm quite happy. In spite of not going to school, I have 7 doctorates, PhDs, all honorary PhDs there.
And do you believe that teaching kids at home is a good thing? Or do you think that nowadays going to school is more guaranteed? This is a debate in the United States right now. Here in Brazil, we have to go to school. It's an obligation for the parents, but people are starting to discuss this.
Well, as long as our education system is so inadequate, sending children to schools doesn't make a lot of sense. I think parents, if they are qualified enough and if they are able enough to understand themselves, would be the best teachers. And I sincerely believe that what a child learns from parents in the first 5 or 6 years of their life creates the foundation of that child's life. And unfortunately today, because we have this materialistic society and we need more money to buy many things, everybody has to work. And so children are born, and within weeks we put them in the care of strangers in daycares and other places, and they grow up with them. And the only interaction parents have with children is when they come home in the evening, and for a few minutes they interact. And usually at that time they are so tired that they can't give much attention to the children. So in that kind of atmosphere, how can you bring up good children? Children who have any love and respect. And that's why you see today there's less and less love and respect between parents and children. And if children grow up learning not to respect their own parents, they are not going to respect strangers. And if there is no respect for strangers or for people, then we have a society that is a mess.
And do you believe that this kind of society also suffers from cultural isolation? And I'd like to know if you think that things like technology and globalization, if they make this social isolation worse, or if they can help to change it?
Well, I think we don't need globalization of technology. What we need is globalization of compassion and love and respect. And we need to understand that we cannot live in our isolation in our country. That Brazil or the United States or India alone cannot create an atmosphere within themselves and say, well, we are happy and we don't care about the rest of the world. Our happiness, our stability, our security is linked with the stability and security of the whole world. And if we ignore that, then we are going to perish with the rest of the world. So that kind of attitude that we have of just thinking about ourselves and not caring about others, it's a very detrimental thing.
But in a world where the violence dominates so many aspects of our lives, how do you think that we can break the cycle and teach people to react not with violence?
Well, we have to, much of the violence that we experience today is generated by anger. Some experts in the United States have made a study of violence, and they've come to the conclusion that more than 80% of the violence that we suffer in our lives is generated by anger. Because we don't teach people how to deal with their anger. We ignore it, we don't want to speak about it, we just allow each one to find their own ways of dealing with it. And so everybody ends up abusing anger. Mm-hmm. And in a moment of madness, we do something that changes our life completely.
But do you believe that the anger is something from inside the human being?
It is.
That everybody has anger and we have to learn how to manage it?
Exactly, that's the point. If we don't learn how to manage anger, and anger is there, you can't deny it. It is there, but it is something that we can use. My grandfather taught me that anger is like electricity. It is just as useful and just as powerful, but only if we use it intelligently. But it can be just as deadly and destructive if we abuse it. So just as we use electricity intelligently for the good of humanity, we must learn to use anger in the same intelligent way so that we can use that power for the good of humanity rather than get involved in violence and destroy our lives and destroy somebody else's life. Nobody gains anything from it.
And in your relationship with your grandfather, have you ever seen him angry? Do you know if some things would keep him angry?
There was one episode there when I found that everybody used to get his autograph, and he had, because he needed funds for his social work, he had put a fee of 5 rupees for each autograph, which in today's currency would be about $5. And every morning and evening when hundreds of people would assemble for his prayers, they would all seek his autograph. So when I was living with him, I had to go into the audience and collect the books and the money and bring it to him for his signature. So one day I thought everybody is getting his autograph, and why shouldn't I get one too, because I'm his grandson. But I didn't have any money then, and so I just got myself a little autograph book, and I put it under the pile of autograph books that I took. When he came to that book, he said, "Why is there no money for this autograph?" I said, "It's my book." And he said, "Well, you should know that I don't make an exception even for grandchildren. If you want an autograph, you will not only have to pay me for it, but you'll have to earn the money and pay me. Don't ask your parents for it." And I said, "No way." I said, "You're my grandfather and I'm going to make you give me this autograph free." So he laughed and said, "All right, let's see who wins." And from that day, every day when he was in high-level political discussions with British politicians or Indian politicians, I would just barge into the room and thrust my autograph book in his face and demand an autograph. My logic was that just to get rid of me, he will sign the book and go. But instead, every time I became too boisterous, all he did was put his hands on my mouth, press my head against his chest, and he went on talking politics. On many occasions, the other politicians used to get exasperated and tell grandfather, why don't you give him the autograph? He disturbs our meetings every day. And grandfather would just smile and say, this is a private joke between the two of us, you don't have to get involved. And the long and short of it is that he never did give me the autograph. But he never ever got angry with me and told me to get out of the room and leave him alone.
Mm-hmm. And are you different from him in this aspect? Do you have the same
No,
calm?
I'm nowhere near him, but I'm trying every day to be as close to him as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I still have a long way to go.
And I'd like to know when he died, if you felt angry, if you
I
felt
did.
like having a revenge, and how did you deal with it?
I did. I was 14 years old when he was assassinated, and it was just 2 months after I left him and went back to South Africa with my parents. And that moment when I heard the news, I was very angry, and I told my parents, I said, I wish I was there, I would have strangled the person who did this. And my parents reminded me of the lessons that my grandfather taught me. He said he wouldn't appreciate that kind of thinking from you. Instead, he would appreciate your dedicating your life to see that this kind of mad violence doesn't take place. So they helped me understand my emotions and forgive the person and dedicate my life to stopping violence.
Which one of your parents was related to Gandhi?
My father.
Okay.
My grandfather didn't have any daughters. He had 4 sons.
And I'm so sorry, I have a lot of questions, but we have to finish.
Yeah.
I would only like to ask you one more question. I see that, from my point of view, religion says a lot about love and respecting the others, but unfortunately it also generates a lot of violence through wars. I would like to ask you your opinion about it and how people could see religion in a non-violent way.
Well, I think, unfortunately, several hundred years ago, Christianity and Islam embarked on a competition to see who can convert the rest of the world into their way of thinking. And when you introduce competition in religion, then you introduce conflict. Competition and conflict go together. And so we are paying the price for it now. And the only sensible thing to do is to respect all religions, because all of them are taking us to the same place. And so why should it matter which religion one chooses to follow? If we have that kind of mindset and respect all the religions and learn to live with them, then there won't be any conflict. There will be more love and understanding.
And are you preparing someone from your family to perpetuate this work and take your role?
Well,
in the
I'm
future?
lucky that my son and daughter are influenced by what my wife and I taught them and did for them. And they are following in the footsteps. How far they will go is up to them. I can't determine that. It's their life. They have to decide and live it. But right now, I am happy that they are doing all that they can do to continue with the work.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much for your time.
Just one point. We have a coffee there, and then Mr. Gandhi can tell you about the legacy tour.
Yeah,
Gandhi
yeah,
legacy.